She died thinking I still loved her. Maybe I did, but not in the way she meant. I waited 43 years for her to say sorry. She never did, so I buried her with the truth instead. If this sounds like your silence, stay. You don't owe them your forgiveness, not anymore. And if you know a woman who carried too much for too long, give her this story. There was a chipped teacup, the one with the faded roses sitting on her nightstand. Always the same cup filled with lukewarm water. She'd insist on it every night as if the precise temperature of the water was the only thing holding her world together. And for a second, no one said a word. I'd bring it to her, set it down, and she'd nod a small, almost imperceptible tilt of her head. That was our ritual. A silent acknowledgement of a duty performed, a need met. But the silence stretched always between us, a vast, unspoken ocean. You call it tradition, but I was the only one bleeding from it. I remember the day I found the adoption papers. I was 13, rummaging through a forgotten cedar chest in the attic. Dust motes danced in the sliver of light from the single window, illuminating the yellowed edges of the documents. The words swam before my eyes: relinquishment, birth mother, irrevocable. It wasn't a bomb dropping. It was a slow, agonizing unraveling. A thread pulled from the very fabric of my being, revealing a hollow space where I thought I was whole. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I just sat there, the papers in my hand, and for a second, the dust motes seemed to freeze in the air. She was in the kitchen, humming some forgotten hymn. I walked in the papers held loosely in my hand. Her back was to me, bent over the sink, scrubbing a pot with a fierce determination. Mother. My voice was a whisper foreign even to my own ears. She stiffened, a barely perceptible pause in her scrubbing. Slowly she turned. Her eyes, usually so sharp, seemed to glaze over. They flickered to the papers, then back to my face. No surprise, no shock, just a deep, almost ancient weariness. You found them. It wasn't a question. It was a statement delivered with the same flat tone she used to announce dinner was ready. No apology, no explanation. Just that quiet acceptance of a truth finally exposed. And for a second, the air in the kitchen grew heavy, suffocating. I waited for her to say something more, to explain why, to tell me about the woman who gave me away. But she just stood there, her hands still raw from the scrubbing, her gaze distant. It was then I understood. The secret wasn't just mine to discover, it was hers to bury, and she had done so expertly for 13 years. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with everything she wasn't saying, everything she couldn't say. It was a silence born of shame, of fear of a past she desperately wanted to erase. And in that silence, I learned to carry it too. My own secret within her secret, a lineage of quiet burdens. You call it love, but I was the only one suffocating from it. I went to bed that night feeling colder than I ever had before. The chipped teacup on her nightstand seemed to mock me, a symbol of a comfort that felt utterly false. I didn't hurt them. I just finally stopped holding the guilt they gave me. The days after were a blur of quiet observation. I really watched her for the first time. The way her shoulders hunched slightly when she thought no one was looking, the way her eyes would sometimes drift unfocused to a distant point beyond the window. I saw the fear in her, a deep, persistent tremor under the surface of her calm demeanor. It wasn't just about my secret, it was about her history. A history she had meticulously pruned, edited, and ultimately silenced. And for a second, I almost felt a flicker of something close to understanding. You call it protection, but I was the one left to pick up the pieces of myself. I began to read everything I could find about adoption in that era. The whispers of shame, the societal pressures, the families torn apart by judgments and expectations. It wasn't just individual stories, it was a societal narrative, a current that swept so many young women into its unforgiving flow. I saw her in those stories, a young woman caught in a trap with choices so limited they barely qualified as choices at all. The thought would rise unbidden that perhaps her silence was a form of self-preservation, a way to survive, to keep going, to build a life out of the rubble of what was lost. But the thought would quickly dissipate, leaving behind the cold certainty that her survival came at the cost of my truth. She never spoke of it again, not a single word, and I, in turn, learned to not speak of it either. It became the phantom limb of our relationship, always present, always aching, but never acknowledged. We navigated around it, through it, as if it were an invisible wall erected between us. Dinners were served, holidays, celebrated, small talk exchanged about the weather or the neighbors. Life on the surface continued. But underneath, a different kind of life was unfolding. A life of quiet resentment, of unanswered questions that hardened into unspoken accusations. I learned to live with the unanswered questions, to fill the void with imagined scenarios with the faces of strangers who might be my birth mother, with a narrative that was entirely my own construction. It was a lonely existence, this secret life, and for a second, I'd wonder if she felt it too, this vast, echoing emptiness between us. Did she ever look at me and see the truth she had so carefully hidden? Did she ever wonder if I too felt the weight of her choice? It was in my late 20s, after she'd had a small stroke, that I started to truly resent the silence. The fragility of her existence became a ticking clock. Would she die with it all still unsaid? Would I ever get the chance to ask, to understand, to simply know? The urgency grew a slow burn that threatened to consume me. But still, the words wouldn't come. The pattern of our silence was too deeply ingrained, too rigidly enforced by years of avoidance. You call it strength, but I was the one left to carry the weight of your fear. I realized then that her silence wasn't just a lack of words, it was a deliberate act, a decision to protect herself at my expense. And the more I understood that, the colder the ache in my heart became. It wasn't about forgiveness anymore, it was about justice. A quiet personal justice for the girl who was silenced, for the identity that was obscured, for the 43 years I spent living a life that wasn't entirely mine. I didn't hurt them. I just finally stopped holding the guilt they gave me. The day she died, it was a Thursday. A quiet, unassuming day, much like all the others. The air was heavy with the scent of lilies from a bouquet someone had sent. She'd been fading for weeks, a slow, gentle drift away from us. There was no dramatic last breath, no sudden gasp, just a cessation, a quiet release, and for a second, the room felt emptier, yet also strangely lighter. I sat by her bedside after the nurses had left, after the doctor had pronounced her gone. The chipped teacup, empty, now sat on her nightstand. I picked it up, tracing the faded roses with my thumb. It was a mundane object, yet it held so many years of unspoken words, of unasked questions. I held it for a long time, the coolness of the porcelain a stark contrast to the lingering warmth of the room. You call it grief, but I felt a strange sense of liberation. I remember thinking, this is it, the end of the silence, the end of the wait. And with that thought came a wave of something I hadn't anticipated, a profound, almost dizzying clarity. All the years of anger, of hurt, of yearning for an explanation, they coalesced into a single, undeniable truth. Her silence wasn't about protecting me from pain. It was about protecting herself from judgment. Her fear was greater than her love, or at least greater than her willingness to be vulnerable. I placed the teacup back on the nightstand, and then I spoke. Not to her, not really, but to the space she had left behind, to the silence that now stretched not between us, but within me. I found her, I whispered the words, feeling foreign and heavy on my tongue. Your birth daughter, my birth mother. There was no one to hear me, no one to respond, but saying it aloud for the first time felt like unearthing a buried treasure, a truth that had been hidden for too long. I had started looking for my birth mother years before, driven by that growing urgency as my adoptive mother's health declined. It was a clandestine search, conducted in stolen moments, in dusty archives, through online forums. A needle in a haystack, made more difficult by the closed adoption laws of the time. But I was persistent, driven by a hunger for connection, for understanding, for a narrative that wasn't built on absence. And for a second, I felt her presence, the woman who was my origin, closer than ever before. And then I found her. Her name was Evelyn. She lived 3 states away, a widow, a retired schoolteacher. The first time I saw her photograph, my breath hitched. There in her eyes, in the curve of her smile, I saw echoes of myself. It wasn't a mirror image, but a reflection distorted by time and distance, yet undeniably familiar. It was like looking at a part of myself I hadn't known was missing. We spoke on the phone for the first time on a Tuesday. Her voice was soft with a slight tremor, but clear. I introduced myself carefully, hesitantly, and then I told her why I was calling. There was a long pause on her end, a silence that felt different from my adoptive mother's. This one was filled with surprise, with emotion, with a dawning recognition. I always wondered, she finally said, her voice thick with unshed tears. I always wondered what happened to you. You call it closure, but I called it finally breathing. I didn't hurt them. I just finally stopped holding the guilt they gave me. We met 2 weeks later in a small cafe nestled in a quiet town. I arrived early, my heart thrumming a nervous rhythm against my ribs. When she walked in, I recognized her instantly, not just from the photo, but from an undeniable resonance that settled deep within me. She had my hands, I noticed immediately, and the same small mole above her left eyebrow. little echoes scattered across 50 years. And for a second, it felt like looking into a very old, very cherished mirror. Her story unfolded slowly, carefully, over cups of tea and shared pastries. She was young, just 18, when she became pregnant. The shame, the whispers, the pressure from her family, it was a relentless tide that threatened to drown her. Her parents, devout and rigid, saw only scandal. An adoption, a secret, was presented not as an option, but as a non-negotiable decree. She spoke of the pain of relinquishment, the hollow ache that never truly left her, even as she built a new life, a respectable life, a life where that part of her history was meticulously erased. You call it moving on, but she called it living with a permanent phantom limb. She never married the father. He disappeared, another casualty of the societal judgment that hung heavy in the air. She went on to college, became a beloved teacher, built a quiet life filled with books and a small circle of friends. But the longing for her child, for me, had always been there, a constant hum beneath the surface of her carefully constructed existence. She showed me a small, tarnished locket she'd worn for decades, inside of which was a tiny, faded photograph of a baby me. It was a tangible piece of her enduring love, a love she'd been forced to silence. Her confession wasn't dramatic. It was a quiet, steady flow of memory and regret. She didn't ask for forgiveness, not directly. Instead, she offered understanding, context, the raw truth of a young woman caught in an impossible situation. And in that sharing, something shifted within me. The hardened core of resentment built up over years of my adoptive mother's silence began to soften. It wasn't about absolving anyone, but about comprehending the intricate web of circumstances, the societal forces, and the personal fears that had shaped all our lives. We talked for hours that day, and for many days after. About her life, about mine, about the gaping hole that had existed for so long, and how in this unexpected reunion it was beginning to fill. There was no grand reunion, no tearful embrace that magically healed all wounds. It was more subtle, more profound. A slow, steady blossoming of connection, a gentle unfurling of shared history. It was the feeling of finally belonging not just to one story, but to two inextricably linked. And for a second, the past and the present converged, and I felt truly whole. The revenge I had once envisioned, the quiet justice for my adoptive mother's silence, faded into irrelevance. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about me, about reclaiming my narrative, understanding my origins, and finding peace in the complex tapestry of my life. My birth mother, Evelyn, didn't replace my adoptive mother. She simply filled a space I hadn't even realized was empty. I didn't hurt them. I just finally stopped holding the guilt they gave me. It's been 5 years since I found Evelyn, and in that time a different kind of quiet has settled over my life. Not the oppressive silence of a hidden truth, but the comfortable stillness of understanding. I visit her often. We talk for hours, sometimes about the past, sometimes about the mundane details of our present lives. There's a gentle rhythm to our conversations, a flow that feels utterly natural, as if we've always been doing this. We don't try to make up for lost time. We simply inhabit the present together. And for a second, I can almost feel the threads of time weaving themselves back into a complete tapestry. My adoptive mother's memory remains, not as a source of bitterness, but as a complex figure in my personal history. I see her now with a more nuanced gaze. I understand the societal pressures she likely faced, the choices she made, the fears she carried. Her silence, while deeply impactful on me, was also a testament to the world she inhabited, a world where certain truths were best kept hidden. You call it forgiveness, but I call it perspective. It's not about excusing her, but about understanding the human behind the choice. The chipped teacup still sits on my own nightstand now. I brought it home after she died. It's no longer a symbol of unspoken pain, but of a journey from fragmented beginnings to a more integrated self. It reminds me of the complexities of love, the enduring power of truth, and the quiet strength it takes to piece together a life brick by emotional brick. It reminds me that some stories are not about grand declarations or dramatic confrontations, but about the slow, steady unraveling of memory breath by breath. I've learned that true justice isn't always about what you do to someone, but what you do for yourself. It's about releasing the burdens you were never meant to carry. It's about claiming your own narrative, giving voice to your own truth, and finding peace in the aftermath of betrayal. And for a second, I can feel the quiet strength that has bloomed from within, a gentle power that needs no validation from anyone else. The revenge I once considered, the idea of exposing her secrets, seems childish now, almost irrelevant. It would have served no purpose other than to perpetuate more pain. Instead, I chose a different path, the path of understanding, of connection, of self-reclamation. And in doing so, I found a deeper peace than any act of vengeance could ever offer. I didn't hurt them. I just finally stopped holding the guilt they gave me.